All right. Hi, and welcome to the Skeptical Leftist Podcast, the show where I talk to a variety of people to spread critical thinking, progressive politics, and left-wing philosophy. And today I'm joined by Jordan and Prince from the Dugout Podcast. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, I'm excited. I've been listening to you for a little while now because you had Lucretia McEvil on, and I'm a big fan of hers, and also or theirs. I blank out on that sometimes.
Yeah, I think they use a bunch of pronouns. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so I've enjoyed your content, and I'm glad I got you on. So thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm really excited to be on the show. I've been aware of your show as well. I believe when the DeRudy column graphic novel came out.
Oh yeah.
I believe you interviewed someone for that. And then
yeah, could be.
That's when I first became aware. It was a while ago too. I remember I was working one of my older jobs when I was shoveling bagel cement seeds out of an oven, listening to the Skeptical Leftist for the first time.
Nice.
So I was excited to be on the show.
Right on. Thank you very much. So I guess a good place to start is always who are you? Who's Jordan and Prince and the Dugout Podcast?
Yeah. Well, I'm Jordan, Central Ohio archivist, activist, and just decolonial thinker and anarchist. Spent a lot of my time, at least the past couple of years, doing environmental and racial justice organizing, and have been pushing a lot for more popular education around anti-authoritarian and decolonial struggles in the U.S. to make sure that locally we have the archives to keep ourselves up to date with what the state's doing, what it has done, and what we can do to fight against this sort of oppression. Because the state knows exactly what it did in 1979 down to the dot. They can search Control F and find that shit out. It's a lot harder for us, even when it comes to academic institutions. That's, for a lot of things, a captured institution. So here we are.
Right on.
I'm Prince. I'm another co-host of the Dugout. I'm born and raised in Ohio. I got radicalized during the kind of Michael Brown uprisings of 2014. And I'd say in the year or two after that, I started learning a lot more about anarchism and direct action and anti-fascism. And that led me to moving to Seattle and being a labor organizer and going to movements in other countries and kind of really doing a lot of environmental justice work, doing a lot of mutual aid. For a few years here in Columbus, I was a lead organizer with Black Queer and Intersectional Collective. And then last year, a bunch of folks locally did a lot of legal support for the Boeing 5, which I've done some interviews about, and I think we've mentioned on the Dugout a few times. But yeah, I'm an organizer. I've been a freelance journalist on and off for 7 or 8 years. I published a book 2 years ago, a memoir about my political coming of age. And I'm learning how to draw. So yeah.
Nice. Nice.
That's us.
Yeah, I guess I've been calling myself an anarchist since about 2011, 2012, somewhere in there. But I think I really started learning about anarchism for real, other than past Emma Goldman, right around that same time, the Michael Brown stuff and the initial Black Lives Matter movement, really.
Yeah, I feel that was, if I look back at that time, I think, I don't know, for at least in my life, I don't know, I feel high school, I remember Occupy, but I guess in terms of my adulthood, it was the first bits of mass mobilization that I saw. And then I also think around that time with Trump running for president and the alt-right kind of getting their first kind of big surge in terms of the last number of years, I think it makes a lot of sense because around that time, at least in what I was feeling, anti-fascism became a core component. And it's not other ideologies aren't anti-fascist, but I think there's a direct practice of just beating the shit out of Nazis and being sorry, you shouldn't even be here.
Yeah.
So I think that ethic was something that I picked up on, even just going to protests based on the ideology of the organization planning the protests. I'd be okay, well, these people aren't gonna really as actively protect the crowd. They're maybe just going to try and chant and have the Nazis go away or
Right.
whatever it is in between. So I think that to me was a big shift that period of time like symbolized.
Yeah, that's something that I really noticed. Like, there's not a lot of protests that I'm aware of in Saskatchewan. I find out about it. Usually, it's Indigenous people, and I find out about it way after the fact because I'm not in those circles, right? But I was deep. Like I was watching like the Black Lives Matter after the George Floyd stuff, and then that's when I really started to learn like the need for like medical care, the importance of like protecting people, masking, the rules that now we all kind of know about. Don't take your phone to a protest, these kind of things.
Yeah. I think repression. Also, it's like repression. How have we all learned about repression in different ways? Just even over the last like 10 years, because it's like 2011. I think 2011 was around the time that like BLM really kind of started. I don't. So I also think about that too, because even being from Northeast Ohio, like I remember 2016, like the RNC happening there and doing like some journalism about like all of the surveillance that happened and how like there were door knocks. And I feel like that gave me a lot of like both local and national context. And then, yeah, of course, 2020 and the white vans pulling up in cities. And
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of that background helped me understand, or like my background before coming to like organizing and before 2020. Because like 2015, 2014, like I remember all that stuff happening. I remember the Zimmerman stuff. I was very much like, I was like in elementary school, in high school, and I was like, oh, my teacher's name is Zimmerman, and they kind of look the same and stuff like that. But it was also like going through a process that I was having different times, different types of like interactions with police and with the state and with mental health institutions, and with different carceral institutions, all through that. Like by the time 2020 happened and I was like on my own, an adult for a couple of years, I'd already at one point been a ward of the state. When it comes to like being in like political circles and talking about things, the state being a solution to like some of our answers and like the logic of how they work and how they operate already was kind of like a mute point. I was like, lived there, been that, where, what else? And then like finding more political spaces where that's the norm, and broadening that, I feel like has been helpful. Because 2020 was just like, I saw somebody get flashbanged in the middle of the street and was like,
wow,
what the fuck just happened? Like,
yeah, no kidding. Yeah. I guess in a sense that kind of leads you to like the black anarchist kind of view of thinking of things rather than like your because you said you were like a ward of the state, so you dealt directly with the failure of these institutions and like in a way that a lot of maybe like white anarchists like myself haven't.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of white anarchists' first time dealing with the state is when they voluntarily arrest themselves for a protest.
Right.
Which is like a conversation within the movement of like, that's why people with such privileges decide to take such risks. And it's a risk reward cost benefit analysis. And I think something that in the movement a lot of people are seeing is, well, these mass arrests, the state knows how to deal with that now.
Right.
Like they've built more and more and more prisons and jails, and even they're putting QR codes on people's armbands so that they can just click them while they're in a mass detention prison during like arresting people at the DNC so that they can make arresting go faster. The mass arresting doesn't clog up their system anymore. It just clogs up their surveillance system.
Yeah. And we're supposed to believe that it's just Trump that's the authoritarian here, right?
No. Eric Adams and Trump are best buddying each other right now. I think Eric Adams just lost his charges because it interferes with his ability to work with ICE if he's under investigation.
That's just like you say, the state is just, it's pure corruption and just control, eh? Like, what the fuck?
Yeah, power's one hell of a drug.
Yeah, no kidding. I guess, not to derail where we were, but like, obviously you're here because you have a podcast. That's how I know who you are. So what got you started doing the Dugout? I imagine it has something to do with what we've been talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like for me, for me, it had a lot to do with I was trying to find ways to bring. I'm an avid reader and archivist, so before um doing this show, it just had like gigabytes of radical left and anarchists and black anarchists and like history on my computer and stuff that I just sit down and read through. And it's information that like I've talked to with my friends in my affinity group in my community. And I felt like it's been very helpful for like my local community. And was like, well, this should be something that we talk about more broadly and like bringing a more popular and like more easily accessible archive of all of this like history
Okay.
with some sort of modern on the ground analysis. Was part that like drove me to it. And it's also honestly also because Prince asked me to do it. We were both really drunk one night at a friend's party. We were like,
That's awesome.
I'm moving back to Ohio. Let's start a podcast. And I was trying to start my media journey solo, and it's hard.
It is. Yeah, it's a grind.
Hard.
Even with a partner, it's a grind. Yeah.
Yeah. I think for me, I don't know. It's a good question. I mean, I think I was living in New York, and I think being kind of separated from a lot of the grassroots work that Ohio kind of symbolized, or that the community here kind of symbolized. I don't know. It was kind of a shift, and then I ended up moving back to Ohio, and I think one, I was really excited to be back to tap in and to see what work was happening, because I do think the Midwest is a very important region, and the politics here kind of represent a lot, and there's so much history and shit happening that and so I think being a part of articulating that is really important. I think naturally, like having done freelance journalism for like 6 or 7 years at the point that we started the Dugout, I've always just been interested in like subversive media that isn't interested in being objective, but is still like based in like research and like life experience and intersectionality. And so I think all of those things kind of crafted it as well. And I think we've both been interested and dipped our toes into podcasting in the past. But I think also on another level, like big conversation we kind of had when we started the Dugout was like, there's not a lot of, I don't know, like there's not a lot of there's not a lot of non-academic Black radical podcasts or things that don't feel overly academic. There's not, I don't know. Sometimes I listen to podcasts and I'm like, is this person an organizer? Do they have movement, work history or movement? I don't mean like work, lives, and labor, but like, have they worked in movements and been a part of like political spaces? Because I think what I'm personally interested in is both like a theoretical analysis, but also a tactical analysis, also a cultural and media-based analysis. And I feel like we found a lot of those things in the podcast, or we've integrated those formats, and like lately even doing more interviews. And so I think a lot of it was just like kind of sensing a gap and kind of realizing like, okay, we have the capacity to kind of talk about these things. And I think especially just in this first year of doing it, like I think filling that gap, we've realized, I think I'm just more realizing even in the past number of weeks, like there's not a weekly or even like bi-monthly Black anarchist podcast out there really, or not many. And so I think, so I'm like, who's out there is cute. So I don't know. There's a lot of reasons.
No, that's awesome. So I guess I kind of got into like anti-racism a few years ago. I was reading a variety of books from Black authors about the subject, and yeah, like even just looking for like if you just Google Black radical podcasts, or you try and look those up, like it's not something that comes up very easily.
In and of itself, and then try to find a Black anarchist podcast.
Right. Yeah.
I'm a like podcast fiend, especially because after 2020 got me really like jumping into trying to find like things to explain the world to me. And I remember like trying to find organizations, and I was just going through YouTube a bunch. I found like Andrewism, Lucretia, and these folks, and then eventually was just like, there's still room here, and like there's still so much more to explore.
For sure. Yeah, there's I recently, I think it was, have never seen anything from, I think her name is Zoe Zamudzi.
Yeah. Who was a part of Black as Resistance?
Yes, I think, yeah. And so on Instagram, Science for Anarchists shared a video of one of her talks, and I was like, I really don't see enough from like Black anarchists or even women anarchists, honestly, if I'm, like I have seen a decent amount from trans anarchists, but not from like various other perspectives.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like this could be a whole conversation in itself, but I mean, I think it's very interesting to think about because, I mean, I think being a Black anarchist, like there's so much of it that we've been reading and studying and living where it's like so much of Blackness is antithetical to the state. And so I do think there is like a anti-authoritarian logic that is really aligned with Blackness and how Blackness like operates in the US. But I also think beyond that, there is kind of like the conversation of like, what are Black people talking about with each other? What's popular to talk about in the mainstream or in the media space?
Right.
What kind of conclusions are people drawing? Because I think one of the things I like about what we're doing and that other like folks are doing is like, I'm interested in like talking about the problem, but I also want to be real about what I think the fucking solution is. And that's usually burn this shit to the ground. And I think when other Black folks in the media space especially don't go that far, I just usually find myself kind of feeling like we're all kind of refracting the same messages when even within the diaspora of Blackness, there's so many like intersectionalities and differences. And so I feel like it's important to show like other people, other Black people, like examples of conversations where the conclusion isn't just vote or wait until the next 4 years so the left can get stronger or whatever the fuck it is. Like it might be expropriation. It might be dumpster diving. It might be, I don't know, a million things that I think need to be articulated. And it's like, I feel humbled just to even be a part of that process. Cause I'm like, I don't know, like we need to, like there needs to be these visible, like exploration of these ideas, especially like as Blackness is trying to survive this hellscape.
For sure.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like one thing I think about too, especially with Black anarchism, or just like decolonial anti-authoritarian, or just like as people call it, like anarchic politics or whatever, is like voluntary association. And I feel like a lot of like early Black organizations, and even like when you look at like the Syrian Revolution, like a lot of the things that were very revolutionary were the fact that like these were voluntary associations, student groups, women's groups, groups like SNCC was trying to get people to vote, but they were organizing a Black politic first and foremost, and then building around the vote, which eventually led to like a party thing. But nonetheless, like it's all about like building and off of these voluntary associations and building something more sustainable and something that people can buy into and buy out of the old system into this new one has been a part of Black politics in the United States and on Turtle Island for as long as we've been here, quite literally. And as long as like folks were stolen. But I think also it's the when looking back as Black anarchists, like to maroon societies or people that wouldn't call themselves necessarily anarchist.
Right.
I'm never interested in, organizing only with anarchists or only with people who only call themselves that. But we still have to like hold up for our principles that we're bringing to a space. But we don't have to name it as something. Like there still needs to be a voluntary association of certain people, oppressed people, or people who are affected by a decision coming together to convene on it or make a direct action about it or make consensus around it or where we can move forward. Or
it makes me think of, go ahead. Yeah.
And I'll also add, what I even think about it even more, why the fuck? It's just the obvious. I'm just also so grateful to have like a queer co-host because I also think when I enter so many radical spaces or Black radical spaces, like I don't know, unless there's that intentionality, like, and I don't know, and even when I go to a lot of movement spaces or I've been to like Standing Rock and other places, I always think like, where the fuck are the Black men? Where are we at? Because I'll see Black women. And so I think there's like all of these conversations to be had about I don't even want to say representation, but about, why are certain people pushed to the margins? And then what does being on the margins force you to contend with?
That immediately made me think of like what sort of labor is marginalized and then who is then eventually going to do that labor. Because I feel like a lot of like with patriarchal labor associations or divisions of labor, it's like, well, I just don't see emotional labor, so it just doesn't get done. And so I don't see what I don't have to do. Even though
Yeah.
maybe I can see it like peripherally, but like it's peripherally, like it's behind me. I can still look forward and like the world around me isn't crumbling. And it's because people behind you are picking up the pieces and doing these things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just thinking like earlier when you were talking about like just voluntarily joining up with various groups, it makes me like, and they don't have to be anarchists. It makes me think of like the land back movement, or like in Canada, the Idle No More movement, where these are like decentralized, kind of like free associated indigenous groups that like they've got a similar goal and similar principles, and like there's a lot of crossover with like what I believe in as an anarchist, but like they don't explicitly call themselves that. And they might be even like, they might even reject it as like a colonized kind of idea or term.
Yeah. And that's very interesting to me because what brought me to anarchism and Black anarchism itself was indigenous anarchists. Like, and I always think it's so ironic because this is something progressives shit on all the time, but like it was doing a land acknowledgement for an environmental organization. Because the way we had our land acknowledgement set up was that we had to do a 5-minute, our lighting went. We had to do a 5-minute presentation on an indigenous event, a resistance story, or history, and like not just of the land acknowledgement. And I focused on like Métis land struggles in the Northwest, and found like the Reconciliation is Dead stuff by Takanawe, and like the person who wrote like Settlers on the Road, from the North Shore info shop, and was reading that stuff. And then the people that they were writing with also cited other Black anarchists. And then I found Clee Benally, who was also citing Black anarchists. And I was like, there's a whole decolonial conversation happening. And like my little archivist brain was like, there's a whole new thing to do. Like, like I was like, there's a whole new thing to study to go into. And it seemed more and more exciting as I kept going down the history of it, especially because like I had heard of anarchism before, but tracing the linealogy of it didn't seem as interesting until I had like found the Black and indigenous anarchists who were like, okay, here are the European anarchists that we are citing as well. Like here's Malatesta, and like diving into like these different types of anarchist organizational struggles. And like that's what brought me to find and then dive into like larger anarchist struggles as a whole.
That's really cool. I guess one of the questions that comes to me when you're talking about that is like, so what is the separation between like a European anarchism and a Black anarchism?
Did it?
I mean, I think it's a good question. I mean, in some ways I'm like, I mean, I think just one, the obvious thing is like, it's different geographic and socio-political contexts. So that there's one, but like what that influences, I feel like Black anarchism to me is very much tied to like a deeper intersectionality, because it also has to account for white supremacy and colonization in this particular way, where like Black bodies have been subjugated by like whiteness, white supremacy, like white colonization. And so I think that layering of it is like a major distinction, because I can say like when I've been in white anarchist and European anarchist spaces, like I usually understand I have to account for my Blackness differently than the other people around me do. Because if it's a European environment, like maybe my Blackness is maybe higher up on a hierarchy in terms of like, I don't know, the xenophobia there, but it doesn't mean that I'm totally divorced from that or that I should be. And then I think in the US context, a lot of it I think is about like Blackness's inherent relationship to carcerality and surveillance, and how whiteness, depending on where you are, like, I don't know, economically or whatever else, sometimes you can evade that surveillance or that carcerality based on your participation in the empire. And so where do you go when you're already like on the outside from birth? And it's like, if you look at it from an Afro-pessimist perspective, like to embody death, to be the social idea of the dead for other people. And I think all of those things on an existential level, to fight all of those things, to wake up every day and to still do those little things every day where you're resisting the state or trying to like take care of your family or community despite all of that. And so all of that to me is like, to me, Black anarchism feels, because I'm Black, a lot more spiritual. It's like I'm tapping into something that my ancestors have had to use to survive.
Right.
And like the anarchic nature of slave rebellions, the anarchic nature of like even the nonviolent strategy that Dr. King presented, or like what the Black Panther Party was doing, like all of those fall under these other ideological lines, but they still represent a sort of anarchic response as well.
Right.
So I feel like that's how I'd kind of define it. Because even in like in any other anarchist space, especially the white or the European ones, I'm like, you still have to look out, because even what whiteness brings to anarchism, it's like, how does that combat Blackness when it's in that
Right.
space as well? And I've experienced that a lot of times, like going to different movement gatherings, and like the white manarchists are like surging ahead, and the disabled people are in the back struggling to run away from the line of cops. And so it's like, even those ethics of care, and how there are the particularities of whiteness where those ethics of care are there, but how does anarchism like sometimes purport like an individualism as well, and how does whiteness kind of feed into that? And so I feel like there's all these, I don't know, like side conversations, but that's my TED Talk.
Yeah, I feel like an interesting concept is like how we think of Zora Neale Hurston. Because my first reaction as a Black anarchist is to look back and be like, she was a Black anarchist. She was against the Communist Party, but she wasn't necessarily against socialism. But she was also very against imperialism in certain ways. And I want to do like a deeper dive into what she was doing, and like her other stuff. But like I think that's a very interesting like understanding of like how individualism shows up. I feel like Black anarchism also recognizes a lot of things inherently in its title, like a recognition of decolonial socialist struggles both in the U.S. and in Africa, and how that influenced like the Black Panther parties in the U.S. were the struggles in Ghana and Angola and Algeria and in Tanzania. And in all those Black Power movements, there were anti-authoritarian versus authoritarian splits, just like the IWA.
Right.
When they first made anarchism. And I think that's the thing, is like made anarchism it wasn't, it existed before the IWA and before Marx and before anything, before Kaprak wrote the book on mutual aid. Mutual aid was thriving.
Right.
And I feel like it's that continual recognition of also property relations, because especially culturally in the US, it's like we were property.
Right.
And like I come from a family where is first generation from Africa, and I know exactly where I come from. It's a completely different understanding than a lot of different folks in America, but how I'm perceived as a Black body in America is no different than
Right.
someone who is having that. So that like universal recognition, of individual, social, family, and community recognition of what that property relation and how that still affects the U.S. and those who deal with property, whether it be the housing relations or the police. Yeah, those are some things that come to my mind.
Do you? Yeah, I'm. There's a lot there, right? So there's a lot there. I really feel like, like I think there's a lot of historical resistance against like colonization, against even the existence of states in African regions that like they might have had like a particular area that they lived in, but they didn't see it as a state, right? And like then colonization comes in and they're like, no, you have these borders and like we're going to enforce this set of laws that we're bringing here. And now you're Catholic too. And like, so there's a lot of like, like really historical resistance that easily predates like what we call anarchism.
Yeah, and I think about maroon societies and how that has existed throughout the various forms of slavery that African and Black bodies have experienced. And yeah, I think that, and even for me, like, and I think we relate to this in a lot of ways, like coming from families that have immigrated to the U.S. in various ways. Like my family, my mom's generation immigrated to the U.S. and she experienced like the end of desegregation busing, and so even I look at my life and I'm like, oh, if I look at my Black experience in the U.S., it's been threatened by the state and white supremacy. And if I look at Jamaica, I look at how this struggle for decolonization was achieved because Jamaica did get independence, but the ravages of that aftermath, with the influence of capitalism, with the influence of foreign intervention, and so for me, it's almost like I don't know. I can look at myself as being defined by that opposition, or I can be defined by how Black people have like lived and existed despite that. Yeah, and then looking at the queer experience, like how so many queer Black folks come to anarchism because like the normative notion of Blackness doesn't allow for certain kinds of bodies or experiences. And so I think to me I enjoy it because I'm like, it's never ending. There's a lot of history to unpack. Like there's so many different figures that I still need to and want to learn about. And I think the kind of the all that is possible to like learn and articulate, I think, is what also makes it exciting. So I'm like, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's so many different ways to think about how one's like perception and then how that affects us makes us move through the world. But then there's just like, I think because also Blackness is so broad. So Black anarchism itself is also so broad, but then so is anarchism. And I think it's one of those things that's like anarchism without adjectives. Like, sure, it's Black anarchism without adjectives. But what it doesn't, it's another one of those things that you don't need to call yourself anarchists as long as we have respect for the voluntary associations or something along those lines. And I think about what you were saying about like kind of like twisting those oppressive forces against us. Like I think about like where my family's from in like the Gambia and Guinea, and like how much poetry was written in the like colonial ledger books that folks were assigned so that they could do accounting or do these other like colonial maths that they were supposed to be doing in the schools, but they were using them to write anti-colonial literature, anti-colonial constitutions, and they would fly under the radar because they were in ledger books.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Or even like I'm trying to relearn my like home language from Fula, and I'm learning it from the Foreign Service Institute's like handbook, which is pretty much what they would give any foreign operative to learn the language and wherever you are. And it's just like, but it's one of those things where like the colonial state or just the state in general, especially like in Africa, as something that's like imposing borders, like borders that weren't there before. Like Sudan just means the land of Blacks. And there were like 5 Sudans 50 years ago. So there was South Sudan, North Sudan, East Sudan, and then Sudan. And then now we have 3. And the current conflicts there because of colonial posturing and because of imperial posturing in the region. Thanks, UAE.
Yeah. It's do you find that like say a Black anarchist kind of way of thinking, is it kind of I guess aligned with a Marxist type of way, or can you be, or do you reject Marxism in a sense?
I would say I would reject Marxism as much as, oh man, I thought their name was going to pop into my head as soon as I like had the line. Who wrote How We Underdeveloped Africa? How Europe Underdeveloped? Walter Green? Walter Rodney. No, because I think like C.L.R. James and Walter Rodney are like these Black Marxist, like more Marxian, Black Marxist libertarian kind of thinkers that, I mean, I also feel like this might be also a very personal question because, I mean, not also personal, because it's one of those things where my anarchism and me as a Black anarchist, my Black anarchism doesn't negate communism. It doesn't negate anarcho-communism. Like communism, we want the stateless society mood thing. Sounds like we're right there. I do feel like I've personally had my own ifs around Marxism, especially when it comes to land relations and how they see still like things like land and labor as just numbers and things to be used and abused. And then we need the union or the more progressive entities to then mitigate the just natural factor of us all consuming each other to survive. And I feel like that's just not how life has to be framed in that philosophical way. So like say like Marx or Marxist, I wouldn't, but like learning and studying Marxism was very useful to me. But also, I don't live in 19th century Germany, and none of us live in a 19th or 20th century world. Capitalism, it acts completely different. Like he predicted shareholder capitalism, but it didn't work, and it evolved beyond whatever he could have known it to be.
Yeah.
Same with Bakunin. Same with all of them. Like I still feel like that's, and same with like a great thinker of our days now, like Klee Benali, is like had lots of ideas that I find very influential to what we have now, but it's not an answer to everything.
Right. That's fair.
I mean, it's a good question. I just feel like it's a question that I literally don't ever think about. I'm like, am I a Marxist? I don't know. Because I feel like, and I think maybe a part of it is I think in some basic ways, even before we get to the, I don't know, the specifics of the ideology, I think I prefer theorizing and trying to actualize a future where we build it as we go and we have frames of reference, but those are all extremely malleable because the situation we're in is malleable. Like history can give us lessons and wisdom and tell us patterns around what we can expect moving forward. And I think that's where some of like the more, because I do believe that revolution is a science and there is a lot of science that is necessary and involved, but I also feel like some of the like fallback onto, I don't, because I'm like, I studied Marxism in high school and in college, and it was a lot of what I read, but I think there came a point where I just had to look at the world right in front of me, and I'm like, are these texts and frameworks from these other periods of time in history, like, are these as helpful to me as like understanding how Black people specifically have had to survive like this shit? And I feel like that was really the shift for me, because I was like, I can appreciate theory, but a theory that hasn't been exposed or isn't speaking to the particularities of my experience, I feel like there's sometimes something where I'm like, okay, I get it, but I don't I don't think I'm the ideal audience.
Right. Fair. That's fair.
And I kind of feel like I kind of am sometimes the audience, because I'm the anarchist that will say I love economics. How we manage our goods and resources, I have to breathe the same air, smell the same farts as the person next to me. Even if I don't like them, we got to share the same water. Like, I do think that those anarchist federal practices are the future of like whatever sort of progressive federalist or confederalism is happening, which is why I'm really excited to looking at what's coming out of Zapatistas and the democratic confederalist struggles in Rojava and northeast Syria.
For sure.
And it also brings me back to like Ella Baker in the Reconstruction era in 1930s, and like specifically in the 1930s to 1937, Ella Baker and George Schuler made the Young Negroes Cooperative League. And George Schuler was a 1930s Black anarchist. And I mean, you can look into them too much. They ended up going a little far right near the end of their life. But nonetheless, like, I also think that like thinking about cooperative economics and mixed economies and more participatory economies is like something that Black anarchists kind of look towards, especially because it's in like the Black Farming Collective and Black Farming Experience. It's just in the economic history here. It's in the familial history here as well.
That makes sense.
Even just having like workers associations and Black workers associations and those type of voluntary associations are more common here around labor as well.
Yeah, for sure. When especially like you say, like when white unions would reject Black workers, or you know, you get where now Black workers have to organize themselves and deal with capital on a whole different kind of method and way level, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So is this going to be some of the stuff that you guys kind of deal with in your revolutionary school or your educational program?
Yeah, so in the school, it's one of those things, like I was saying, I fancy myself an archivist. I have been gathering these research materials and these materials for years now. And I feel like, yeah, kind of bringing them to the forefront and then having more of a space to look at them and examine them together with folks that are interested, and then developing more of that. I think we're still figuring out the process of how we want to develop each and exact module to be.
Fair.
But yeah.
And I think there's a lot of possibilities. I think just generally, I love the idea of like liberation schools and like the different kind of workshop models and Zoom models and virtual and in-person models of sharing political ideas in education. Like I remember when I was in New York, I think there was like the I can't remember.
I know what you're talking about. People's Forum.
People's Forum. I did like a revolutionary summer school with them. And I thought that was really cool. And I think having been an organizer and an educator, I think the skills it takes to like facilitate a meeting and lead a training are the same skills that you need in a classroom. And I'm interested in just building out a personal framework around what revolutionary education looks like to me, with like the resources of the internet, with all of the different archives that are online. I've seen like the revolutionary school is like, how can we build out like a deeper kind of educational space around the episodes that we put out? So like, I know we've talked a lot about the Black Panther Party. I'm interested in like having annotated transcriptions of like different interviews, of digging deep into like the different programs that they've had, the different survival programs that they've had, just really building out a educational space that has a clear lens of like both Blackness and radicalism as we look at like all these different parts of history. Because I look back at like how I learned about Black history in school, and I'm like, I think if I'd just been offered a different angle on it, even, or like had the chance to find a resource that gave me a different angle, it would have opened up a whole new world. Because like, I learned about Martin Luther King and Malcolm X in middle school and high school, but who was assigning his book? Who was doing like a reading club about it, or having us do discussions around the topics involved, and how, like, I think there's a lot of possibility. And I kind of view like, it's like almost in a way like a podcast is almost like a traveling school in a way. And I'm interested in what does it mean for that school to have like a digital base that we can even like build out in other ways down the line.
Yes, a digital rear base. Got to think about everything like a diriga, like a gorilla. I mean, I honestly do think about it like, in reading about the struggle against like Portuguese and French colonization in Guinea and Guinea-Bissau, and in Cape Verde, like education to fight disinformation and to be able to reliably share ethics information with each other within like revolutionary forces is like ground one, very important. Which is why like even when they were fighting and training guerrillas, it was also in literacy as well. Because having that communication basis is vital to any social and cultural project. Yeah. And I feel like that's something I really want to like be able to have these like self-guided history lessons. So like, because I know for me, like I love reading a history book, but not everybody loves that. Not everybody really wants to get that. Some people want the points and something to think about how that relates to them in their life. And I think also as anarchists, like thinking about education in different ways is very important, because it's one of those things that now in our life with our current states is mandated. Right. I think wherever we should go, we should always have education. And we should always have a baseline education for the folks that we're in community with. And that conversation, however that goes, whatever. But reimagining what that means to people, because there is such a negative connotation with that, especially in the Black community and in colonized communities, like not being able to read, like giving somebody a book and then being like, read it for the revolution. Okay, we need a study group, and we need a study group to be able to go sentence by sentence. And I feel like that's something I learned a lot from James Yaki Sales, who was in the Black Liberation Army. They died in 2005 from cancer, but they did a lot of the Black Liberation Army education. And they wrote books about Wretched of the Earth to study, or like it's called Meditations on Frantz Fanon's Wretched of the Earth, that they would use to then go like paragraph by paragraph. Like they're like, we need to break this down. Because no matter where you are in your educational journey or your literacy journey, we need to be able to bring people up no matter where they are, because we're going to be getting in militants or getting in revolutionaries from every part of an educational field from the colonized diaspora, which means being able to be adaptable.
Yeah, for sure. That's, yeah, I don't know. I quite like that. I know, like, for myself, just like, I almost never have time to read. And even when I do have time to read, like, I have trouble staring at a page for longer than 30 seconds. So it's nice to have education that's like audio format, or like that I can pause and come back to later. And like, I think that's a great way of like kind of helping people self-direct their education.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I've always grown up and people were like, oh, you're so smart. But then the state was like, you need an IEP. And then my family was like, you also need an individualized education plan. Like, we need to have ways to help. So I was in classes with people who they considered to be dumber. But like, these were still my friends, and we were having these conversations, and we were able to do all these things. And it was like being able to recognize, oh, maybe some of us all need help in different ways.
Yeah.
But that's just baseline education. Like, if we're going to teach masses of people over and over again, we can't expect cookie cutter shit unless you actually just want cookie cutter results.
Right. Which obviously we don't, right? As anarchists, I think.
Yeah. Which we don't.
Yeah. That it's interesting in a sense. Like, I guess maybe it's not interesting, but more of a too bad that like there's like this enforced system of education, and then some people get labeled as like the dumb ones. Like, I've met a lot of people in my life, and only a very few of them would I ever say couldn't learn things. And like, maybe ignorance is I mean, that's a pretty widespread thing, and people seem to hold on to it as much as they can sometimes. But like, I've never met anybody who like just literally could not learn anything if they were given the opportunity and were given the chance to self-direct it.
I feel like a lot of that also has to do with just like stubbornness. And I feel like a lot of it's like the fact that ignorance is so pervasive. Because I was just having a conversation with my friend about this, because I feel like ignorant is also one of those terms that I feel like is technically accurate. But if you call it an ignorant person, I've been ignorant on things. You call that to me to my face? You don't know how to politic. It's war.
I'm building a wall now. Yeah.
Yeah. So it makes me think of like the fuck around and find out content that you see on the internet. And especially some that Democrats are posting now about Republicans, or even just poor white people that they think voted for Trump, complaining about things on the internet now. And then Democrats are like, fuck around and find out, you ignorant slut. Shouldn't have voted for Trump. And it's like, whoa. Where did this? I mean, I know where it came from. Cut a liberal, a fascist bleeds, but like,
yeah, that's right. But like, yeah, no, exactly. It's like they lack, when it's the opposing team, they lack all empathy and ability to see the context of the situation.
Yeah, or just context of humanity.
Yeah.
Which, is. I was thinking about that for a second. I was like, what is an anarchist opposing team? And I'm like, well, I sometimes struggle seeing fascist humanity too. So we all have our crosses to bear, or crosses to not burn, to bear.
Yeah, no, not burn. No. No, I have trouble online. It's particularly tough because everybody's their worst version of themselves when they're arguing on social media or whatever. Like, I don't think of myself as a person who goes out and antagonizes people. But when I'm on Blue Sky and I'm arguing with a Marxist-Leninist, that's it. Like,
especially a Marxist. We were just talking to Margaret Killjoy, and they're like, I'll have time for anybody in my neighborhood that says the most reactionary thing. But an ML says one thing, and I lose my...
Yeah,
and I think it has to do with more with like authoritarianism in the revolution. No.
Yeah, no. It's I mean, I guess it's counter-revolutionary. Like, it really
I know the amount of times I've caught myself saying that. I'm like, am I Lenin? Am I?
Right. Yeah. But I guess we're at 50 minutes. Is there anything that we should touch on that we haven't gone through yet?
Well, since we're here, I feel like we should also shout out the project In the Belly and In the Mix, which is something that we both also work on, which is a magazine and podcast that is by and for incarcerated abolitionists. So we mainly just do producing and social media for it. And all the authors and hosts of the podcast are currently incarcerated abolitionists.
Okay.
So always want to put a highlight on that project because, as we were saying, as anarchists without adjectives, like it's definitely a project full of anarchists, but it's not said that way. It's a voluntary association of a bunch of abolitionists, folks who have mainly been impacted by the carceral system in some way, shape, or another, and are here to create some sort of active comms communication and a forum between and for currently incarcerated abolitionists to organize.
That's very cool.
To all our modern day abolitionists, tap in.
I listened to, what is it called? Rattling the Bars or Rattling the Cages podcast.
Okay, yeah, with Eric Kang.
Yeah. I listen to that pretty regularly. That's a pretty solid podcast. Like, I don't, outside of like that, get a lot of abolitionist material coming my way. So it's good to have that kind of like, especially from the perspective of like people who are impacted by it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the mix is real dope too, because it started inside prison and with some folks on the outside helping like do some of the producing stuff. But we're about to hit our 5-year anniversary for running stuff this year. And especially for In the Belly, which is another like publication based off the same thing. And yeah, real excited.
And so where can people find that?
Yeah. Let me find the exact Instagrams for that, because I know for Instagram it's at BellyZine, and then for In the Mix it's at, I don't know what In the Mix is.
I'm gonna follow it right now.
InTheMix.media, and then and you can find In the Mix Prisoner Podcast on any podcasting platform you'd like, and then BellyZine, you can buy a copy from our online website, but most of our like labor goes towards, like, we have over 500 over 600 subscribers inside, so it's mainly just like getting folks the stuff inside, but we do sell it to folks on the outside. Catch us there.
Is it hard to get it inside? Is it like considered like contraband in a sense? Like
in some states it's pretty hard, but those states will be facing lawsuits. I mean,
technically the United States is supposed to have like a freedom of speech, right?
Yeah. And you know, one of the funny thing is that actually the main thing that we can do is that as a publication, they're fucking with our money by stopping our publication, because there's previous things like the censorship stuff doesn't work. They're prisoners. Like, they don't have rights like we do.
Yeah, I suppose.
But a magazine, someone on the outside, we have the right to sell, and they're messing with our that's the legal precedent we have.
Because a company has more rights than a person.
Absolutely. It's a company has multiple people, allegedly. Actually, no, it's not. It's just a liability entity.
No, that's pretty great. I guess all that's really left is where can people find you, and that's it.
Yeah, folks can catch us at the Dugout Pod at Instagram. I don't want to say that wrong, actually.
Let me read you all of our links. And I also wanted to mention, in terms of something that folks can kind of keep an eye out for, I know Lucretia McEvil has a mutual aid thing that they're doing right now, just trying to raise funds for moving costs. So if any folks are listening or love Lucretia's work, like, definitely go to their page and try to share that, because I know that would help them a lot. But if folks want to find the Dugout, you can find us on Instagram at Dugout Podcast, or you can find us on Substack. We also have a YouTube. If you want to support, check us out on Patreon. And yeah, you can listen to our podcast anywhere that you listen to podcasts, basically.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but it says that you have a free newsletter on your Patreon.
Yeah, we're launching that like in the next month, but it's going to be regular updates on different movements that we kind of check up on, different resources related to direct action and the Direct Action 101 series. So kind of just like a monthly update for folks that kind of want to maybe be sent some zines in their email and some movement updates and maybe some things that are additional to the podcast, like once a month. So yeah.
I know, like, I've been on my Patreon, I've been giving free members episodes early at the same time as, they only get the regular episodes, but they get it 2 days ahead of time compared to the regular post places. So I'm like, here's a thing for free members.
Yeah, and that newsletter is for free members and folks who decide to give us however much. There are tiers there, but there is we do a lot of readings, like audio readings, and a lot of the early access to that goes up there. Early access to pretty much all of our episodes, like as soon as we're done editing and all that jazz, we just throw it up on Patreon for folks. And then eventually there will be a lot more, like, more exclusive readings over there. Because one thing I've loved and found to do is, like, these reading episodes where pretty much I'm just recording an audiobook. Like, I'm pretty much going to record all of Clee's work and record a bunch of folks. Because I feel like one thing is about the podcast, too, is to be a hub of archived knowledge. And half of that is not even the stuff that I can regurgitate. Like, I just want you to read what I've read. And if you don't want to, or there's no way to read it, and you can listen to me read it. And early access to that stuff will be on the Patreon, but eventually that stuff will come out. And if you ever have a book that you really want read, come over to the Patreon and DM me.
Very cool. Well, I really appreciate your time. I thought it was a great conversation.
Yeah, this was great.
And have a good one.
You too.
Thank you.